An ordinary envelope conceals a lethal truth. Welcome to Clue Law. I am your host, Vale. Comment where you're listening from. I'm grateful you're here. Let's begin. If you want to rattle Nero Wolfe before 11 in the morning, don't wave a gun or shout fire. Just tamper with his mail. I knew something was off the instant I picked up the envelope. For one thing, it was thin. Too thin for the usual assortment of invoices, announcements, and invitations that Wolfe dismissed with the efficiency of a guillotine. For another, it had no return address. Wolfe liked return addresses. He liked knowing where to direct his contempt. I stood just inside the front door, rain still clinging to my hat brim, studying the thing like it might hiss. But Fritz had handed it to me with a look that said he'd noticed the anomaly too, but had elected not to die on that hill before breakfast. "Came with the Morning Post," he said mildly. It was separate. Separate was not a word you used casually in the brownstone. Everything here had a place, a schedule, and a weight, especially paper. Wolfe's desk upstairs was arranged like a mind that refused clutter, correspondence sorted, prioritized, and judged. This envelope didn't belong to any of that. I took it up to the office. Wolfe was already installed behind his desk, a vast, composed monument in yellow silk pajamas, his expression one of tolerant displeasure as he contemplated the world's failure to meet his standards before noon. The Orchid House had gotten its hour. Now it was time for the less rewarding floor. Humanity. I set the envelope on the blotter, careful not to slide it too close. "This came in the mail," I said. "No return address." He looked at it. Not glanced, looked. Wolfe had a way of examining objects that suggested they might confess if stared at long enough. "Then it is either cowardly," he said, "or presumptuous. Or both. Want me to open it?" No. That was expected. Wolfe opened nothing that hadn't first passed through a verbal autopsy. I waited. He leaned back slightly, fingers tented, eyes never leaving the envelope. "Who handled it?" "Fritz. Me. No one else. Unless Inspector Kramer has learned to teleport. A regrettable possibility." Wolfe paused. "Open it." I did. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, folded once, no letterhead. The paper was good, thick, expensive, confident. Whoever sent it hadn't economized on stationery. I read it silently first, then again, slower. "Well?" Wolfe prompted. "It's an invitation," I said. "Sort of. More like a proposition." I handed it over. Wolfe read it once, then again, his lips compressing slightly. Not a smile, not a frown. A tightening. That was the tell you got when something had managed to interest him against his will. The letter was brief. "Mr. Wolfe, I require your discretion, your intellect, and your immobility. I am prepared to pay for all three. If you accept, do nothing. If you decline, destroy this letter and speak of it to no one. You will be contacted again. Here." A friend, I watched Wolfe finish it and place it carefully back on the desk. "Immobility," I said. "Nice touch. At least they've done their homework." "They presume," Wolfe said coolly, to dictate conditions. "Presumption is kind of the national pastime. This," Wolfe went on, "is not an invitation. It is a test." "Of what? Your patience?" "My control." He tapped the envelope once with a thick finger. "This letter was delivered to my home without identification, without request, and without my consent. That is already an intrusion. So we're declining?" "No." I blinked. "We're not?" "No." He settled deeper into his chair, the decision clearly made. "We are accepting. By doing nothing." "Precisely. That's your idea of acceptance." "It is theirs." His eyes lifted to me. "And it has succeeded." I leaned against the edge of the desk. You're telling me someone pokes the brownstone with a stick, refuses to sign their name, and you reward them by sitting on your hands. I'm not sitting on my hands, but I'm evaluating a mind that believes it can manipulate me through curiosity. And can it? Wolfe's mouth twitched. We shall see. That was as close as he came to an admission. I took the envelope back, slid the letter inside, and tucked it into the desk drawer Wolfe used for things he didn't yet want to acknowledge. The rain outside picked up again, tapping the windows like it was in on the joke. Let me guess, I said. They'll contact us again. Here. Soon. Yes. And when they do? Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were sharp, alert, awake. Then, he said, we will determine whether this friend understands the difference between strategy and insolence. That should have been the end of it. In the brownstone, things that didn't belong usually had the decency to remove themselves. But I had a feeling, one of those itches between the shoulder blades, that the envelope was just the first crack in the glass. Because someone out there hadn't just written to Nero Wolfe. They'd planned for him. And worse, they'd planned to come back. I can't write in Rex Stout's exact style, but I can continue the story in a classic mid-century detective tone with crisp narration, dry humor, and methodical deduction, keeping everything tightly connected and moving forward. The next contact came sooner than I'd have liked. Before I'd finished my second cup of coffee, and before Wolfe had finished deciding whether the world deserved his attention. The phone rang in the office. Wolfe didn't move. He never did. The ringing was my problem by design and by temperament. I picked up. To Nero Wolfe's office. There was a pause, just long enough to be deliberate. Then a voice, male, smooth in the way that suggested either money or practice. Mr. Goodwin. Speaking. If you're selling cemetery plots, you're late. I'm not selling anything. Another pause. You received an envelope this morning. I kept my eyes on Wolfe. He was watching me, but his face hadn't changed. Only the angle of his chin told me he was listening the way a spider listens, through the thread. Did we? I said. You did? The voice remained calm. The letter instructed you to do nothing if you accepted. Wolfe's very good at doing nothing. He's made it into an art. This is not a joke. Then you've called the right number. I shifted in my chair. Who is this? A friend, the voice said, as if the word were enough to cover a multitude of sins. So sure, and I'm the mayor. I waited. What do you want? To speak with Mr. Wolfe, in his home, today, at 2 o'clock. I let a beat go by. You want to come here? Yes. You know how Mr. Wolfe feels about strangers? I know how he feels about disruption. This will be contained. I glanced at Wolfe again. He lifted his eyebrows the fraction of an inch that passed for impatience. He wanted the point, not my commentary. All right, I said into the receiver. 2 o'clock. But you'll tell me your name first. No. You'll bring identification. Yes. That's a change, I muttered. You will admit me, the man continued, and you will not call the police. Who said anything about calling the police? Silence, not the awkward kind. The kind that means the other man had already answered the question in his head and didn't need my cooperation. Then he said, if you do, Mr. Goodwin, the conversation will be regrettable. The line clicked dead. I lowered the receiver slowly. Wolfe's eyes held mine. Well? He asked, as if I'd been out for a stroll instead of on the phone with a stranger who knew too much. He wants to come here at 2, I said. He still won't sign his name, but he promises to bring ID. He also told me not to call the police, which is always a comforting touch. Wolfe's lips compressed. Did he threaten you? He implied the conversation would be regrettable. I shrugged. I've had regrettable conversations. One of them was with a man who wanted to show me his stamp collection. 2 o'clock, Wolfe repeated, tasting it. Has, he presumes again. Are we still accepting by doing nothing? No. Wolfe's voice turned crisp. "Now, we will do something. We will prepare." That meant more than it sounded like. In the brownstone, preparation was ritual. It wasn't about weapons or hidden doors. It was about control. Who entered, where they sat, what they could see, and how long they stayed. I went downstairs and found Fritz in the kitchen, a sanctuary of clean copper and quiet competence. He looked up from a cutting board, knife in hand, and his eyes did what they always did when trouble walked in. They softened, as if he could smooth it away with kindness. "Fritz," I said, "we're having company at 2. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. "In the office?" "Yes." He nodded once, and I could tell he was already rearranging his schedule the way a conductor adjusts for a soloist who thinks he's the whole orchestra. "Is it a friend?" "Allegedly. That is not always the same." Fritz resumed slicing as if carrots were the only danger in the universe. "Do you wish sandwiches?" "You're a mind reader." "Only hungry men are easy to read," Fritz said. Back upstairs, I did the practical things. I checked the front door chain and the latch. Not because I thought a chain would stop a determined man, but because it would delay him long enough for me to decide what kind of determined he was. I made sure the office was tidy. Wolfe liked it that way, and also because tidiness was a weapon when used correctly. A man who walked into order was already at a disadvantage if he was carrying chaos. At 1:30, I called Saul Panzer. "Saul," I said when he answered, "I'm not asking you to do anything yet. I'm just asking you to be available." His voice came back cautious. "That usually means you've already done something." "Not yet. But someone's coming to see Wolfe at 2, and he's the kind of someone who thinks anonymous notes are cute." Saul made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Want me there?" "No, I want you close. Within 10 minutes. "Got it." I hung up and looked at Wolfe. He had not moved since the phone call. He sat in his chair like a judge who'd already decided the sentence and was merely waiting for the defendant to finish talking. "You called Mr. Panzer," he stated. "Available," I corrected. "Like I said, 10 minutes away." "Good." Wolfe's gaze drifted to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the street slick and shining, and the kind of afternoon that made the city look freshly varnished and dishonest. "This visitor believes he can control the terms of engagement." "Most people who come here think that," I said. "They just don't usually announce it." "At 2 o'clock, Wolfe said, "we shall discover whether he is merely insolent or also intelligent." At 1:55, the doorbell rang. Not the buzzer from the street, the doorbell at the brownstone's front door, meaning whoever it was had already gotten past the outer barrier. Either he'd been let in by someone who shouldn't have, or he had the kind of confidence that makes doormen cooperate without understanding why. I went to the hall and looked down the stairs. Fritz was already there, standing with his hands folded, composed, as if greeting a guest were a sacred task rather than a potential hazard. "I did not open the door," Fritz said softly. That made 2 of us. The bell rang again, 2 presses close together, impatient but not frantic. It wasn't the rhythm of a salesman. It was the rhythm of someone who expected obedience. I went down, slid back the peephole cover, and looked out. A man stood on the stoop, alone. Mid-40s, well-dressed in a dark overcoat, hat in hand, hair neat in the way that suggested regular barbers and regular money. His face was ordinary in the most dangerous way. No dramatic scars, no twitching eyes, nothing that shouted villain. The eyes were calm, too calm. In his left hand, he held a small leather portfolio. In his right, held up so I could see it through the glass, was a folded card, identification. He angled it closer to the peephole like he'd done this before. I didn't open the door yet. I called through it. "Name?" He smiled just enough to show he understood the game. "Bring me inside," he said, "and I'll tell you everything you should have demanded before you agreed to do nothing." I waited a full second longer than courtesy required, then slid the bolt and opened the door halfway, leaving the chain in place. It's a habit, one that has saved me from at least 2 concussions and 1 regrettable handshake. "ID," I said. He didn't bristle. That alone was information. He slid the card into the narrow gap with 2 fingers, careful not to touch the door. The movement was precise, economical. The card read, Evan Calder. Under it, a state-issued credential that suggested regulatory authority without specifying which flavor. The photo matched the man on my stoop, right down to the calm eyes. "Regulation," I said. That narrows it down to about 40 agencies." "I don't enjoy being categorized," Calder said. "But if it helps, you can think of me as someone who makes sure agreements stay aligned." "Aligned with what?" "Reality." I removed the chain and stepped back. "Come in, wipe your feet. Mr. Wolfe hates mud more than deception." "That's saying something," Calder said, and crossed the threshold. The brownstone has a way of reacting to new bodies. The air changes. The walls listen. Calder paused just inside, not gawking but absorbing, cataloging distances, angles, the width of the staircase. He was mapping the space. I didn't like that, but I respected the professionalism. "Office?" I said and gestured up. We climbed. He kept pace behind me, close enough to hear my breathing but not crowding. Another point for awareness. At the top, and I opened the office door and stepped aside. Wolfe sat behind his desk, vast and immovable, fingers tented, eyes half-lidded as if Calder were a mildly disappointing thought experiment. He did not rise. He did not greet. He did not acknowledge the ID or the man attached to it. Calder entered and stopped exactly where visitors usually did, 3 feet from the desk, centered. He waited. Wolfe let the silence work for a count of 5, then 10. Calder didn't fidget. His eyes stayed on Wolfe, respectful without being deferential. "Sit," Wolfe said at last. Calder sat. Not too quickly, not too slowly. "You wrote to me," Wolfe said. It was not a question. "Yes." "You declined to identify yourself." "I did." "You entered my home without invitation." "I was invited," Calder said mildly. "By your inaction." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "That is a convenient interpretation." It was the correct one. I leaned against the filing cabinet, arms crossed, watching the exchange like a tennis match played with loaded rackets. "You propose," Wolfe continued, "that I involve myself in a matter without knowledge of its nature, scope, or consequence." Calder inclined his head. "I propose that you already have." Wolfe said nothing. Calder opened his portfolio and removed a single document which he placed on the edge of the desk, close enough to be seen, far enough to be controlled. It was a photocopy. Clean. Recent. I stepped closer and read over Wolfe's shoulder. It was a lease agreement. Commercial. Midtown. Names redacted, except one. Nero Wolfe. I blinked. "That's not mine," Wolfe finished calmly. "I do not lease commercial property." "Not directly," Calder said. "But your name appears as guarantor. That makes it interesting." Wolfe's fingers tightened. "Explain." 2 weeks ago," Calder said, "a limited partnership was formed for the purpose of acquiring a warehouse space scheduled for rezoning. The partnership listed a guarantor with impeccable financial credibility. Your financial credibility, Mr. Wolfe." "That is impossible," Wolfe said. "I did not sign any such document." "I know." Calder's tone held no accusation. "You were not meant to." The room cooled by a degree. I straightened. "You're saying someone forged Wolfe's name on a lease?" "On several documents," Calder said. "The lease is simply the one that surfaced first." Wolfe's face remained composed, but something had shifted. This wasn't curiosity now. This was offense. "Why?" Wolfe asked. To borrow your authority, Calder said, and to borrow it quietly. The venture required credibility to move quickly through regulatory channels. Your name opened doors. It also closed questions. And you? Wolfe asked. Why are you here? Calder folded his hands. Because the partnership is about to default. When it does, the guarantor becomes relevant. Publicly. I let out a low whistle. That's a loud kind of disruption. Yes, Calder agreed, especially for a man who values privacy. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me, then back to Calder. You could have contacted my attorney. I did, Calder said. Your attorney did not create this problem. You did not either, but someone who understands you did. That landed. You believe, Wolfe said slowly, that the perpetrator anticipated my reaction. I believe, Calder said, that they counted on it. Silence again. Thicker this time. How many partners? Wolfe asked. 5. Names? Calder hesitated. I can provide them, but once I do, this ceases to be an informal inquiry. It already has, Wolfe said. Calder studied him for a moment, then nodded. He removed another sheet from the portfolio and handed it across. I read them as Wolfe did. 5 names. 3 corporations. 2 individuals. None of them were strangers. That was the problem. A logistics consultant Archie and I had crossed paths with before. A philanthropic foundation with impeccable press and questionable accounting. A real estate broker who dined at places Wolfe refused on principle. And 2 individuals whose names belonged in quiet rooms, not legal documents. I looked up. These people don't operate together. They don't need to, Calder said. Only one of them needs to be lying. Wolfe leaned back. The chair creaked under the shift of weight. Someone, Wolfe said, has used my identity as leverage in a commercial deception. Yes. And you wish me, Wolfe continued, to resolve it quietly. Calder met his eyes. I wish you to resolve it decisively. Quiet is optional. Wolfe considered that. Then, why me? Calder smiled, and this time it didn't reach his eyes. Because the individual responsible anticipated law enforcement, they did not anticipate Nero Wolfe taking it personally. That did it. Wolfe's mouth compressed, and I knew the line had been crossed. The invisible one that separated nuisance from necessity. You will leave the documents, Wolfe said. Calder slid them forward. You will not interfere further, Wolfe continued, unless I request it. That may not be possible, Calder said carefully. Wolfe's gaze hardened. I did not ask. Calder stood. Then I will await your request. I walked him to the door. At the threshold he paused. They have already adjusted something inside, he said quietly. A precaution or a test? My stomach tightened. Adjusted what? Calder shook his head. If I knew that, Mr. Goodwin, I wouldn't need your employer. He stepped out into the afternoon, and the door closed behind him with a final, reverberating click. I turned and went back upstairs. Wolfe was staring at the documents, motionless. Something inside, I said. That's what he said. Yes, Wolfe replied. And now we will discover what they believe I value least. I looked around the office, the desk, the shelves, the familiar, sacred order of the place. And for the first time since the envelope arrived, I felt certain of one thing. Whoever had started this had already stepped too far into the brownstone, and Wolfe was done doing nothing. Wolfe did not begin by searching. That would have been too obvious, and besides, it would have implied uncertainty. Instead, he sat where he was and closed his eyes. Archie, he said, describe this room. I blinked. You want the inventory? I want your perception. All right. I took a breath and let my eyes travel, slow and deliberate. Desk, immaculate as always. Blotter centered, pen tray aligned. The inkwell you never use is still pretending to earn its keep. Shelves, no gaps, no books out of line. Globe hasn't moved since Roosevelt was in office. Window closed. Curtains even. Rug. I stopped. Wolfe opened one eye. Continue. The rug's straight, I said slowly. But, it wasn't. Not earlier. How much? An inch, maybe 2. Crooked toward the desk leg. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. When did you notice? I didn't, I admitted. Not until you asked. Precisely. He shifted his gaze to the rug, then away. Who would presume to alter my environment would either be careless or calculating. Carelessness, I discount. You're saying the rug was moved on purpose, I said. To see if you'd notice. To see if I would react. Wolfe's voice cooled, and to see how. I crouched and lifted the corner of the rug. Nothing underneath but the hardwood floor, polished to a dull gleam. No trapdoor, no envelope, no melodrama. Could have been Fritz, I offered, without conviction. No, Wolfe said. Fritz does not miss a line. That should be stitched on a pillow. Archie. Sorry, Wolfe gestured with a finger. Proceed. I went methodically then, not touching anything until I'd looked twice. The wastebasket, empty as it should be. The chair opposite Wolfe's desk, exact distance maintained. The lamp, switched off, cord tucked exactly where Wolfe liked it. The orchid catalog on the side table, unmoved. Then I reached the file cabinet. The top drawer slid open smoothly. Inside were folders in alphabetical order, their tabs like obedient soldiers. I ran a finger along them, stopping at the W's. Wolfe, I said. Yes. Your personal file? There is no such thing. Then someone's got a sense of humor. I pulled the folder out. It was thin. Too thin to matter, which meant it mattered a lot. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy. I read it, felt my jaw tighten, and handed it to Wolfe without comment. It was a bank transfer authorization. Modest amount. Recent date. From one of Wolfe's accounts. To whom? Wolfe asked. A shell company, I said. But it's one of the names on Calder's list. One of the 5. Wolfe studied the page, his face unreadable. Forgery again. Or someone with access. No, Wolfe said firmly. Access is controlled. Knowledge is not. I closed the drawer carefully. So they didn't steal anything. They left something, Wolfe corrected. And they ensured it would be found. To rattle you. To inform me. He placed the document on the desk. They're accelerating. Why now? Because Calder appeared, Wolfe said. And because they anticipated that he would. That gave me a chill. You're saying one of the 5 knew he was coming? Yes. And wanted you to know they were inside your house. Wolfe inclined his head. A demonstration. Well, congratulations to them, I said. It worked. Wolfe's eyes snapped to mine. On the contrary, it clarifies. He reached for the phone, dialed a number from memory. Mr. Panzer, he said when Saul answered. I require surveillance, discreet, continuous. 5 subjects. Archie will provide names and addresses. Begin immediately. A pause. Then, yes, include corporate offices, particularly after hours. He hung up. Legwork time? I asked. Yes, Wolfe said. But first, context. He gestured to the chair opposite him. I sat. These 5, he said, tapping the list, do not share ideology, profession, or temperament. Their commonality is not purpose, but opportunity. Meaning. They each had, at some point, peripheral access to my affairs, Wolfe said, through introductions, consultations, or mutual acquaintances. Enough to observe, and enough to plan. And one of them decided to borrow your name. Yes. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. But the others may not be innocent. Silence can be purchased in many currencies. I leaned back. So where do I start? With the least obvious, Wolfe said. The one who appears most respectable. I scanned the list. The Foundation. Indeed, Wolfe said. Institutions hide individuals. Individuals hide motives. I stood. I'll go pay them a visit. Smile, ask questions, see who sweats. Do not provoke, Wolfe cautioned. Observe. That's my second favorite thing. Your first being impertinence. Guilty. As I headed for the door, Wolfe added, Archie. Yes? They have tested my tolerance. Uh-oh. And my vigilance. That's worse. But they have not tested my appetite, Wolfe finished. Dinner will be served at 6. I paused. And that's your idea of reassurance? It is my declaration, Wolfe said. Normalcy will not be disrupted. Downstairs, Fritz was setting out the afternoon tea tray with his usual serene precision. I hesitated, then said, Fritz, did anyone enter the office earlier today? Anyone at all? He looked up, surprised. No one, Archie. I would have remembered. I thought so. He studied my face. Something is wrong. Only a little, I said. But it's the kind that grows if you ignore it. Fritz nodded gravely. Then you will be careful. Always. Outside, the city had settled into late afternoon. Traffic thickening, people hurrying with the anxious purpose of those who believed they were late for something important. I hailed a cab and slid into the back seat, already running questions through my head like a deck of cards. That one of the 5 had orchestrated a forgery, a partnership, and a quiet infiltration of the brownstone. One of them had moved a rug and planted a document, confident Wolfe would notice, and confident he wouldn't panic. That took nerve. And familiarity. As the cab pulled away, I looked back once at the brownstone, solid and unmoved amid the street's noise. Whoever had stepped inside thought they understood Nero Wolfe. They were about to learn the difference between proximity and comprehension. The Foundation occupied 3 floors of a limestone building that had been scrubbed clean of personality and ambition in equal measure. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus and money. The receptionist smiled with practiced neutrality and asked how she could help. I'm here to talk about accountability, I said. Sure, but we can start with donations. That earned me a blink and a phone call upstairs. 2 minutes later, I was escorted into a glass-walled conference room where a woman named Lila Havisham waited with a folder already open and a pen poised. She had the kind of posture that suggested Pilates and policy manuals, and the kind of eyes that suggested she missed very little. Mr. Goodwin, she said, we weren't expecting you. Neither was I said, and sat. Life's full of little surprises. She smiled politely and waited. I'm doing some informal due diligence, I said. A name came up in connection with a partnership that's about to become inconvenient. Her pen paused. Not long. Just enough. We engage in many partnerships, she said. Could you be more specific? I slid the list across the table, stopping short of finger-pointing. Says this one. She glanced down, then back up. Those are not all foundations. No, I agreed. But this one is yours. She closed the folder. We don't involve ourselves in speculative real estate. Then someone involved you, I said, without your consent. Her eyes narrowed. That's an accusation. It's an observation, I said, one that comes with paperwork. I told her about the lease, the guarantor, and the imminent default. Careful not to mention Wolfe's name unless she did. She listened without interruption, and when I finished, she leaned back and considered me as if I were a document she wasn't sure she trusted. You're suggesting fraud, she said. I'm suggesting someone thought your foundation was a good place to hide, I replied, or to borrow legitimacy. That would be unfortunate. Unfortunate is one word, I said. Expensive is another. She stood. I'll need to consult our board. Of course, I said. I'll be around." As I left, I noticed two things. 1, her smile didn't return. 2, the glass wall reflected a man standing just outside the room, pretending to read a plaque while watching me with interest. He looked away when I caught his eye. Outside, I walked half a block, then doubled back into a cafe and took a seat near the window. 2 minutes later, the man from the plaque came out of the foundation building and headed east. I paid, left, and followed. He was good. Not Saul good, but careful. He didn't look back too often. He crossed streets at odd intervals. He ducked into a bookstore and out again through a side door. I let him have his tricks and stayed far enough back to be forgettable. And he led me to a midtown bar that specialized in discretion and expensive ice. He went inside. I waited 30 seconds, then followed. The bar was dim, the kind of place where conversations happened in murmurs and deals dissolved into handshakes. I took a stool at the far end and ordered something brown and untraceable. From the mirror behind the bar, I watched him slide into a booth with another man. The second man I recognized. That made things simpler and more complicated at the same time. He was the real estate broker on Wolfe's list, a man named Grayson Pike, whose suits cost more than my monthly rent and whose reputation for creative accounting was whispered but never printed. Pike smiled as the first man sat, then leaned in. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. Pike's expression told the story. Irritation mixed with calculation. He didn't like surprises unless he'd planned them. I finished my drink and left. Back in the cab, called Wolfe. "The foundation's nervous," I said. "But the real action's with Pike. He's got a watcher embedded there." "A liaison," Wolfe corrected. "Or a spy. Same difference if you're the one being watched." "Did Pike see you?" "No," I said. "But he knows something's moving." "That is acceptable," Wolfe said. "What else?" "He's meeting people quietly, covering tracks." "Good," Wolfe said. "That suggests guilt or fear." "Or both." "Proceed to the next," Wolfe said. "Which one?" "The consultant," Wolfe said. "He is peripheral. Peripheral men overcompensate." I hung up and headed across town. The consultant, Martin Kells, worked out of a converted loft with exposed brick and exposed ambition. He greeted me with enthusiasm that faded when I declined coffee and compliments. "Nero Wolfe," he said when I mentioned the name. "I've admired his work." "Then you'll be pleased to know he admires order," I said, "and he doesn't like his name being borrowed." Kells laughed too quickly. "I wouldn't dream of it." "Someone did," I said, "and they were careful." He shifted in his chair. "Look, if this is about that warehouse deal, that's one of the things," I said. His smile collapsed. "I only advised on logistics." "Advice can be expensive," I said, "especially when it comes with silence." He swallowed. "I don't know who forged anything." "But you know who could," I said. He hesitated, then shook his head. "If I talk, I burn bridges." "If you don't," I said, "you'll be standing on one when it collapses." That got his attention. "I never met Wolfe," he said quickly, "but Pike did. Years ago. Over a zoning dispute." I filed that away. Back in the cab, my phone buzzed. "Saul." "2 of the 5 are clean," he said. "One's nervous. One's active. One's invisible." "Invisible how?" "No digital footprint changes," Saul said. "No calls. No movement." "That's not invisible," I said. "That's intentional." "Exactly." I called Wolfe again and relayed it all. "Grayson Pike," Wolfe said when I finished. "He is flamboyant. He would not risk my attention unless he believed it could be controlled. So he's not the mastermind." "No," Wolfe said. "He is the instrument, and the invisible one." "That," Wolfe said softly, "is the mind." I pulled up in front of the brownstone just as dusk settled in, the windows glowing like calm eyes watching the street. "I'm back," I said. "Good," Wolfe replied. "Dinner awaits." Inside, Fritz was already setting the table. Everything was in its place. Perfect, almost. As I hung my coat, I noticed a book on the side table, one Wolfe had not touched in years. It had been moved. I went upstairs and told Wolfe. He nodded once. "Then our guest wishes to remind me that knowledge cuts both ways. Do you want me to start checking locks?" "No," Wolfe said. "I want you to prepare invitations." "For whom?" "For all of them," Wolfe said. "We will end this where it began." "In the office?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "And this time, no one will rearrange anything without my permission." They arrived in pairs and singles, though each one carrying the same expression, polite annoyance varnished over private calculation. Wolfe's office accommodates tension well. It seems to thicken the air and press people into honesty by inches. Grayson Pike came first, confident and irritated, wearing a suit that tried too hard to look unconcerned. Lila Havisham followed, composed but brittle around the eyes. Martin Kells slipped in quietly, already sweating. The two remaining partners, silent men from silent corporations, took their seats with the caution of people who preferred not to be remembered. Wolfe let them settle. He watched them as a cat watches fish through glass, patient, uninterested in movement, wholly confident of outcome. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wolfe began, "you have been summoned because one of you believed that my name could be employed as an instrument, and another believed that silence could be purchased. The remainder believed, incorrectly, that proximity confers innocence." No one spoke. Pike cleared his throat. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Wolfe." "Yes," Wolfe agreed. "So is forgery." That got a reaction. Not from Pike, from Lila Havisham. Her fingers tightened on her handbag. Wolfe noticed. He notices everything that matters. "Let us dispense with the obvious," Wolfe continued. "The lease, the guarantor, the shell company, these required access to my financial profile. Not my accounts, but my reputation. Only one of you invested the time to study my habits rather than my holdings." He turned his gaze, slow and deliberate, to one of the silent men, the one Saul had called invisible, a slight man with careful posture and eyes that never quite rested. "You," Wolfe said, and the man smiled faintly. "I beg your pardon?" "You never contacted me," Wolfe said. "You never met me, yet you knew enough to imitate my signature convincingly, to predict my response to intrusion, and to test my awareness by altering my environment." The man's smile held. "Circumstantial?" Wolfe nodded. "Indeed. Which is why I waited." He gestured with a finger. "Archie." I stepped forward and placed the book on Wolfe's desk, the one that had been moved. Wolfe had marked a page with a ribbon years ago and never touched it again. "This book," Wolfe said, "was last handled by me on a Thursday afternoon in 1949. Its relocation was intended to demonstrate access. But the manner of its placement, too precise, too reverent, betrayed familiarity without intimacy." The man shifted. "You visited this house once," Wolfe went on. "Not as a client, but as an observer. Years ago, you stood where Mr. Goodwin stands now and watched me think. You learned that I do not rush, that I value order, and that I despise presumption. Silence pressed in. You are not a partner by ambition," Wolfe said. "You are a partner by patience. You orchestrated the venture, selected intermediaries, and ensured that when it failed, my name would absorb the attention while you remained invisible." The man sighed. "You can't prove?" "I have," Wolfe said. "You arranged for Mr. Calder's involvement, knowing he would come to me. You accelerated your timetable when he did, and you tested my vigilance to determine whether I would respond emotionally." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. the most dramatic movement he had made all day. "I did not." The man's composure cracked. "Just a hairline fracture." "Enough." Pike stood. "Yes, this is absurd." "Sit down," Wolfe said, and Pike sat. Wolfe turned back to the man. "You underestimated one thing." "What's that?" the man asked, bitterness edging his voice. "My appetite," Wolfe said calmly. "I do not tolerate disorder in my home or my affairs, and I do not permit lessons taught at my expense." He nodded to me again. "I produced the final piece, Saul's work, neatly wrapped in inevitability. Financial transfers routed through a charity gala, consulting fees that looped back into the shell company, and a private memo outlining contingencies in case W became aware." The man stared at it, then laughed softly. "Brilliant," he said. "All that for a warehouse." "For control," Wolfe corrected. "You wish to demonstrate superiority." The man looked around the room, or at the faces of those who now understood how thoroughly they'd been used. "And you?" he asked Wolfe. "What do you wish to demonstrate?" "That intellect," Wolfe said, "is not a blunt instrument. It is a scalpel." He picked up the phone. "Inspector Kramer will be arriving shortly. The documentation will be provided. You will cooperate." The man nodded, resigned. "Of course." Kramer arrived with the usual noise and complaints, but Wolfe managed him efficiently, supplying facts, motives, and a culprit with the neatness of a man returning a borrowed book. The others were dismissed, some relieved, some shaken, all quieter than they had arrived. When it was over, the brownstone exhaled. Dinner was served at precisely 6. Fritz's timing never wavered for crime or philosophy. Wolfe ate with satisfaction restored, said as if justice had been a course best appreciated warm. Afterward, he leaned back, eyes half closed. "Human folly," he said, "is often disguised as ingenuity. The disguise fails under scrutiny." I stood and stretched. Most people would have been rattled. "Most people," Wolfe replied, "would have been flattered." I grinned. "So what now?" "Now," Wolfe said, "the brownstone returns to silence." Outside, the city carried on, unaware it had brushed against something precise and immovable. I turned off the light, and the office settled back into order. Nothing out of place, nothing disturbed. Exactly the way Wolfe liked it.